Being a draw in professional wrestling, being a spectacle larger than life, a character which the audience can get behind, selling merch, and of course, putting butts in seats. The term draw in professional wrestling is open to interpretation. For some people, they base it off of how many butts were put into seats. Others base it on TV ratings or pay-per-view buys. And for some, it's how much of an attraction you were. How much you transcended the professional wrestling business and smoothed that into the mainstream media. But who is the biggest needle mover in professional wrestling history? We got to start in the 1930s and 40s with a man named Jim Londos. Londos immigrated to America from Greece at age 12, and a matter of years later, he adopted a no-nonsense persona. Added to that was his physical appearance, which made Londos a huge draw. He was so talented, so strong, such a physical specimen that he was able to attract an audience during the Great Depression of all times. Londos by many is called the biggest overall draw in wrestling history. Before the times of the WWE, before wrestling shifted its focus to entertainment rather than pure wrestling, it's reported that he was able to draw 100,000 people in the Athens Stadium, and 30,000 of those people were turned away during that event. With his consistency and drawing power, his name definitely needs to be in the conversation for this accolade. Granted, he didn't work a heavy schedule, but 30 years of being an attraction, that's quite impressive. You know what else is impressive? Selling out Madison Square Garden 187 times. That is what Bruno Sammartino did. He reigned as world champion for 11 out of 14 years and only lost that title because he basically begged to. He needed a break, so they took the title off of him. Back before you needed a gimmick to be hot with crowds, there was a mystique around strong, no-nonsense bruisers, and Sammartino was just that. He would run through opponents in record time, he would dispatch of people with the greatest of ease, so much so that he himself became a valuable commodity. When you're that good that your nickname is the King of New York, you have something going for you. A consistent draw for over a decade. This came at a time where there were families with less televisions and wrestling hadn't boomed quite yet. But what about when professional wrestling did boom in North America? When Bruno's time was up, Vince McMahon wanted to turn WWE into a global juggernaut. He wanted to make that one star that could help him make a global expansion, and Hulk Hogan was that guy. The exuberant personality, the bright colors, the marketability, being able to live the role, Hulk Hogan had it all. Without Hulk Hogan, professional wrestling does not reach the heights it did in the 80s. Words do not do justice how much of an impact Hulk Hogan made in helping the WWF cross over into the mainstream media. He was wrestling's first global megastar. He was the reason why wrestling went from a niche to catering to a worldwide audience. The charisma, the physique, the leg drop, the iconic shirt tear and recognizable pose. The reason why a lot of us are here today is because of Hulk Hogan. He was on SNL, he was making guest appearances, he was shipping every type of merch imaginable for a sustained period of time. He was the one selling out buildings, and he was the one who began the era of sports entertainment. Without the groundwork that Hulk Hogan laid, there is no Attitude Era. Hulkamania was the rise of professional wrestling in North America. Not to mention that he was the reason that WrestleMania became as successful as it did. Without Vince McMahon having Hogan there to pull the trigger on that event, all the crossover with celebrities and actors just doesn't happen. When he jumped to WCW, he's the one who made it go from competition to the A show for 83 straight weeks with the formation of the NWO. People wanted to see Hogan. He helped television networks get ratings, not to mention the NWO shirt, which on its own is one of the highest selling pieces of wrestling merch ever. What bodes in Hogan's favor was that this was when wrestling was hip. The marketability was there. You could plaster his logo and color scheme onto anything and it would turn a profit. People wanted his merchandise, people wanted to be Hulk Hogan. He was a character larger than life. He was the one who drew 93,000 fans at WrestleMania 3 with Andre. 8 of the first 9 Manias, he was the one who main evented. He did it in the AWA, the WWF, WCW, Japan, and then right back to WWE all over again. Hogan simply drew money, fans, and ratings for 20 years on a consistent basis, and with that, he made wrestling a global phenomenon. Speaking of phenoms, we gotta quickly touch on The Undertaker. The thing with The Undertaker was, yes, he was a draw, but he was more so a draw for hardcore fans. He kept hardcore fans engaged to the product during the PG era with his character work and constant dedication. He himself made WrestleMania his event with the streak. It basically became an attraction that people would come to watch every year. Would the streak finally end? The thing that deters him to being the answer for many people is, even though he is the best pure character in wrestling history, you didn't see Undertaker on TV. You didn't see Undertaker skyrocket a boom period for WWE. He was there and he was a huge part, yes. He's a recognizable name, yes. But his crossover appeal and overall marketability outside of catering to hardcores, not necessarily there. Let me ask you a question. What does the Statue of Liberty, the Eiffel Tower, and the Taj Mahal have in common? These are landmarks that people go out of their way to see. Andre the Giant was much the same. Standing at 7'3", Andre the Giant is probably the biggest attraction wrestler that the wrestling business will ever see. Andre was in the 70s what Hogan was in the 80s. He was a grand spectacle that people would come in just to see the sheer size of and how a man that large would compete in a ring. The guy is considered a god in places like Japan. He'd be paid 5 figures to work one night. He broke into mainstream movies with his role in The Princess Bride. He made people money. Seeing someone that big do what he did, it was dollar signs. He was that coveted. Wherever Andre went, people lined up in droves. Then you look at a guy like Ric Flair, who is a huge draw in the NWA territories, making those shows the most attended ones, reigning as world champion and making babyface stars. Flair's style was perfect in the NWA, but as pay-per-views and television networks started to rise, people started to find Ric Flair's limitations in the ring. The way he wrestled, yeah, it was a draw for the NWA system, but probably wouldn't have worked on a larger scale like WWF or WCW. But I think universally the man that is regarded as the biggest draw in professional wrestling history is Stone Cold Steve Austin. When the argument is made between Austin and Hogan, people will say that yes, Hogan drew for a longer period of time, but Austin drew better numbers in a smaller period of time. If you were to inflate Austin's numbers, he'd be higher than Hogan. Austin was WWE's hottest star in their most profitable era, a time where everything was wrestling, the Attitude Era. Without Stone Cold, the WWF was dead. He carried that roster and plugged WWF from going out of business. His popularity with the fans was sky high. He received some of the biggest reactions and fanfare in the history of pro wrestling. Then came his merch sales, which are unopposed by any other star in the time frame Austin performed. The Austin 316 shirt is the highest selling shirt in wrestling history, and to this day, Austin remains one of the top merchandise sellers in the WWE. With that, wherever he went, he was able to bring people into arenas. The badass persona, the simple yet very recognizable look, and of course the Austin 316 catchphrase. He was the one who, after Hogan left, brought WWF back to the mainstream eye in its most popular time. They were able to branch off into different ventures, be that merchandise, television commercials, and overall mainstream exposure. He did this during the height of the Monday Night Wars, and in that boom period for wrestling, he won the war for WWF. He turned the tide against WCW, and his returns in the 2000s generated bigger needle-moving business than any wrestling return. And it was so much more than that. That goes for live events, merchandise, TV ratings, pay-per-view buys. That is undisputable. Austin is the reason why in 1999, WWE went from a private company to a public company. Wrestling was at its height. Sure, Hogan kickstarted the initial boom, but during the second boom, Stone Cold carried it to astronomical heights, which are yet to be seen again. But at the same time as Stone Cold Steve Austin, the company had another full-time megastar, and that was The Rock. Both these men's popularities at a fever pitch at the same time. A lot of people will argue that The Rock's popularity came because of Stone Cold. But when you look at the Attitude Era's prime years, that was in 1999 to 2001. Some of those years, Stone Cold was injured, and having The Rock at the top, the company was just fine. For The Rock, you look at his buy rates. His involvement in WrestleMania 27 as the guest host alone got that show $6.6 million. And then he has to his name the most bought WrestleMania ever. WrestleMania 28 with John Cena. 1,217,000 buys. But pay-per-view buys aside, you look at The Rock's marketability, having a catchphrase like "Do you smell what The Rock is cooking?", selling t-shirts, appearing in mainstream television, creating a brand for himself, which he was able to later on translate into Hollywood. Not to mention his unrivaled sales in home video, merchandise, and event tickets. The audience hung on his every word. He had the charisma, the fun moves, the compelling character. Many will say that The Rock took things even higher by giving Stone Cold a run for his money. 2000 to 2002, those were the years where it was The Rock show. Rock was on the cover of all the video games and magazines, he was hosting SNL, and many would say that he was the biggest pop culture influence at that time. There are some factors that deter The Rock from being regarded as the bona fide top draw in the industry. The longevity is one of them because he turned to Hollywood pretty quick. But in today's day and age, if you were to put The Rock's face on merchandise, if you were to tell audiences that he'd be returning, just based on his overall global appeal and stature in the entertainment industry, he would easily drop. But what about when The Rock and Austin were gone? What about when the Attitude Era had ran its course? Well then, WWE was left without a main attraction. And then we had Brock Lesnar's mega push to the top. And let's be real, Brock Lesnar did not become a draw in WWE. He became a draw when he left WWE. This guy was carrying the UFC for a period of time with some of the highest fight card buy rates. When he came back in 2012, he was a much bigger name because of his dominance in the UFC. People were like, this is a legit fighter, and now he's going back to WWE, which created a huge buzz. A recognizable name which caters to both fans of sports entertainment and the combat world. Brock brought in fans from the UFC to WWE and vice versa. When you look at the presence, sheer viewership, television numbers, and worldwide appeal, Brock's the guy. And then you come to the quintessential company man, marketable and consistent, and that is John Cena. You can say whatever you want about John Cena, but you cannot argue, much like Hogan smoothed the transition from niche to mainstream, Cena did that for TV 14 to PG. John Cena has made WWE the most money ever overall for merchandise. Not one particular item, but wristbands, t-shirts, obscure items like these. You name it, Cena turned a profit for that company. Simple things like a spinner championship. People will complain, but you look at PG, parental guidance, catering to an audience of children and families. John Cena's superhero character, the bright colors, the friendly face on the merchandise, it was the perfect money-making machine for the WWE. Then you look at how much Cena helped expand WWE's global viewership and make himself a household name. 9 times out of 10, you ask someone who John Cena is, they'll tell you no problem. As one of very few megastars who can still go in the ring, when Cena returns, it boosts attendance and live event figures. Looking at ratings, yes, they did fall under Cena's hand. But that was an inevitable drop that was gonna come no matter what. As television becomes more oriented towards on-demand, the numbers will go down. The thing with Cena being so high in merchandise sales is also that his longevity has been extremely strong for the company. If you were to adjust someone like Stone Cold's number, he'd be in the same ballpark. Also with Cena, the ability to cross over into the mainstream. You look at the You Can't See Me, which became globally recognized, the amount of goodwill he brought to the WWE with his charitable work, the whole persona and legacy he built for the company, there you go. If you want to talk pay-per-view buy rates, Cena shares that distinction with The Rock. And then you look at a guy like CM Punk. CM Punk's run on top of WWE was very short, and it has an asterisk beside it because they didn't really let him break out into that mainstream media. Then you look at his AEW return and the amount of viewership and t-shirt sales it got. He was the one, although for a brief time, that ended Cena's reign as the top merch seller. Speaking of reigns, we get to the Tribal Chief, the man who reportedly has rivaled John Cena's merch totals as a heel no less. Right now, the exposure for him is amazing. He's on Fox, a huge network. He's easily the biggest full-time star in all of pro wrestling. His reactions are getting hotter and hotter every week, and he's the top guy at a time where WWE is grossing their highest income. I think gauging Reigns' popularity at this time is a double-edged sword. Yeah, you can see it on social media and with crowds, but also we're in a very streaming-oriented world where people will watch clips on YouTube rather than actually sitting down in front of their TVs. So yes, Roman Reigns is a draw right now, but how much of a needle mover he is will be seen in years to come. There's still a ways to go. So, who is it? Who is the biggest draw in wrestling history? Well, if you're talking sheer money, the best money draw in professional wrestling is Stone Cold Steve Austin. If you were to say that he'd be returning tomorrow to the ring, all the older fans would want to see it, coupled with the new generation too. The glass shatters when that man enters, and so does the money. But if you look at pure drawing power, being a physical specimen, no over-the-top BS, then the answer is probably Londo, Sammartino, or Andre. If you bunch longevity, Cena and Hulk are the kings of drawing a consistent viewership and translation into the mainstream sphere of the entertainment business. If I had to pick one, it would be Stone Cold. He didn't outstay his welcome, he helped WWE reach astronomical heights, saved a product that could have been down under. I'd say the issue in determining who's the biggest draw comes down to a multitude of factors. You don't have access to company financials, the eras are very different, inflation is the thing that needs to be determined, and the overall popularity of wrestling is not in the same scope anymore. It's a debate that's gonna rage on forever. But who do you think is the biggest draw in professional wrestling history? Who, in your opinion, is the biggest needle-moving star in the history of professional wrestling? Let me know in the comments below. I look forward to seeing what you guys have to say. As always, stay safe, stay blessed, take care.